Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining me. My name is John, and I'll be hosting you this evening at this Dean's Dialogue on Ethical Leadership. I'm a student at Henley. I'm in the final stage of an MBA, and I've been doing that on and off for a couple of years. I took a couple of breaks, but this is a new kind of event that we're doing online. It's based on the kind of learning I've experienced. Apply what we learn, and we focus on the student rather than the expert. Of course, the experts are important, and of course, we're going to hear from them in just a minute. But really what these sessions are about is to take conversations that our Dean, Jon Foster-Pedley, has had with other leaders on pertinent issues. And then most importantly, while we're watching that conversation, to start provoking dialogue in the chat. So you'll notice that we're in a meeting that we speak with each other as opposed to someone talking at someone else. So that's what we're going to do. This conversation was recorded a little while ago. It's just difficult to line up diaries, so we grab leaders when we can. This particular issue came out of us doing some social listening. Every week at Henley, we have meetings about what's going on social media. I mean, obviously, the open programs we do are, all rigorously accredited and, governed by those accrediting bodies, both here and abroad for some of the programs and others locally. But when it comes to the short things the short courses that we work on, there's a lot more room for the education designers to listen to what's going on and what's needed. And then with great agility, they sort of come together and create sort of programs. Another thing that's relevant to this conversation is that Jon has given the Henley team quite an audacious goal, which is to try and educate 1 million people in the next 5 years. And we know we won't do it with accredited programs. There are questions of access, there are questions of funding, there's questions of logistics. Where do you find the teachers? Where do you find the bandwidth? And so we try to do as many of these events as possible, where we try and spark dialogue and kind of use dialogue as a sort of a learning tool as well. So what we like to do with a group this size, you'll notice that it's a meeting. It's really, really easy. All we do is make sure that we all keep our mics off until we want them on. If we want them on, we generally just put our digital hand up. If you're not familiar with the platform, it's really easy. You just go down to your bottom toolbar and you'll see reactions, the small smiling emoji with the plus sign. Click on that and you'll give you some options, either to react, agree, disagree, put your hand up. And then we ask that you keep your mic off until such time as we invite you to speak. That's one option. If it's okay, we're going to record the session because it's brilliant to see what it is that people think and their opinion on stuff. We use that to kind of shape and think about what's going on in the kind of, our collective mind. If you've done any of that sort of theory, you'll know that, when people gather, they form a collective mind. It's much more powerful than any one individual mind. And so we like to use that as sort of thought-provoking material to deepen our understanding. So that's kind of what tonight will be. So the format is quick chat, explain the rules. We're going to play the conversation. We're going to end it at about 50 minutes in. And then we're going to have a substantial amount of time to engage online. While the conversation is going on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some comments in the chat. And what I'd like to do is invite you to use the chat function, because a lot of the use, and I'll start to gather themes as we go, so that by the time we kind of get towards the end of the conversation, it'll be your turn to get involved. And you're welcome to use the chat function to comment or put your hand up and comment. In a group this size, these sessions are getting bigger and bigger. We'll try and keep track of the order in which you put your hand up. It's important that we're fair. Also, try and contribute to the conversation. It's always better not to enter into some kind of binary argument. That's not really the point of this. By all means, challenge. By all means, test. Be robust. Fully understand that. But I've noticed a tendency in some conversations, when I go to braais, for example, in South Africa, often we find use of energy. So let's try and avoid that. If you strongly disagree, put it down. Let's keep a record of that. We'll send you the chat. I'm also going to save the chat at the end, and I'm going to send it off to a graphic artist that we work with. And Lita Curry will then distill what she reads into one very graphic. And then I'll send that to all of you, if that's okay. With your permission, we'll email you that graphic. It's a wonderful way that we also use at Henley to visualize information so that it triggers memories and allows us to kind of go back to the subject and chew through it again and see if we still agree with the way we felt when we sort of were going through that experience the first time. So we'll use all of the kind of tricks we're learning online at Henley at the moment to take you through what I hope will be partially self-inspired learning and guidance from two really good experts. This was a conversation that I've always been a fan of Professor Jonathan Jansen. I interviewed him once. I believe that he's on one hand, deeply, rigorously academic, and on the other hand, a maverick. He's unafraid. He speaks truth to power. He takes action. And he's also not afraid to be down. He's totally accessible. So he's down on, I'm not by any means a professor or a vice dean or, anything like that, but he comes down to everyone's level. And I find that amazing. The one person I really admired that I wanted to see if we could involve. And the other one, of course, is our dean, Jon Foster-Pedley, quite a radical educator with pretty progressive ideas. And the fact that he's taken Henley to where he has since he took over. First of all, the growth. I mean, it's a good business, and that's obviously quite important. If you're going to be a good business school, you should practice what you teach. But also, Jon has, through his own thinking and policies, transformed the student body profile to far more closely mimic the demographics of our country. And I'm blown away that he's done that. So that's great. Greetings all from the US. Hi, Pamela. That's fantastic. Thanks for joining us. And I hope you get lots out of this. This is the other joy of doing these events now, the way we're doing them. We're not bound by any sort of geography or anything like that. Okay, so that's it from me. Just a couple of rules of engagement. Please do use the chat. It's going to become our record. If you aren't actually commenting, let's keep our mics off. There's quite a few of us in the room. And if we leave them on, just a couple of background noises will kind of create much more background noise. So that's that. I will time it, and at around 50 minutes, we found a good end point. It's not only about what Jon and Jonathan will be discussing, which is a very good topic. It's about what do we need to teach leaders as two big educators. What do we need? What is critical to teach leaders? How do you find them? And then how, of course, do you develop them? How do you help them? A very insightful conversation. And I hope it's not what you think it's going to be. I really hope that you're as surprised as I was in the conversation. So we can go ahead, please. Let's roll the video. Let's read you in the chat. We won't comment until at the very end. You can type your comments all the way through the video, but please don't speak comments. We'll do that afterwards. Okay, let's roll the video. I hope you enjoy it. Here it comes. So thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. This is the first of what I hope will become a regular feature called the Dean's Dialogues, the Dean's Office Dialogues, where Jon, Dean of Henley Business School, Dean and Director, Henley Business School Africa, will be inviting various people on. And I'm sure, Jon, you'd like to chat a little bit about the criteria for people in your dialogues that will contribute to kind of the conversations I think we need to have.
Yes, well, thanks, Jon, and thank you, Professor Jansen, for coming. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I'm very excited. I think the criteria is we're facing a lot of challenge in our world, and we have a country with the highest Gini coefficient in the world, massive numbers of intelligent people, and that's hyperbole, but I want to use it, who are not getting access to learning and education, who are capable of building our economy, building their lives, making a fair world. So who's doing what to make this life better, and who should we follow, and who should we be as leaders? And I really want to learn. You know, I've come from a particular background, and I'm progressing in my learning journey in spite of my whitening beard. I have huge lessons still to learn, and I'd like to share that learning journey with other people and talk to people who have made a change, inspired others, and also being provocateurs. And I say that in a French sense, because in the English sense, provocation has got this sort of aggressive, nasty. The French see provocation as this intellectual stimulation that moves immediately into activism and change. And I'd like us to be inspired and to believe in ourselves that we can now be part of this. So that's what all this is about for me.
Brilliant. And so your first choice of guest, I think, was an excellent one. Certainly someone I love watching, because our first guest, every time I've heard you talk, Prof, my blood moves. And so Professor Jonathan Jansen, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
So could we begin by, we're in a room here with two important educators. I mean, education is important, but there's a huge difference between being academic, I believe, and being an educator. I think there's a doingness to educating, which is really important, and I think you both have done so. John, on your side, let me call you JFP, if I might, in this interview. You've changed the profile.
It's Johns, isn't it?
It is. It's all
John, Jonathan, and John.
So JFP, you've changed the profile of Henley since you became the Dean of Henley, and that's a very material change to how business schools look and feel. And on your side, Prof, I'll call you Prof. I guess that's the differentiator.
No, please call me Jonathan. I really would appreciate that. In my other life, if they called you Professor, you asked, what did I do wrong?
Okay, good. So Jonathan, in your life, you've been very vocal and very you've been very energized in articulating what education in South Africa, I know in other areas as well, but largely in South Africa, what it needs, where it should go. So we have you both in the same room, which I think is an invaluable opportunity. And so if I could maybe start with you, Jonathan, and ask you, what is it that we need to be focused on at the moment as South Africans?
I think we need to, in the first place, to sort of figure out how to stay alive. I mean, we in the middle of the probably the most serious existential crisis in the century, that affects not only us but everybody across the world. So staying alive is a serious commitment, but it's also about staying well. I still think that so much of the focus at the moment has been on our physical health, and nobody really talks about the emotional and spiritual and psychic well-being, of us as humans as we hopefully move towards a post-COVID world. And so, pre this pandemic, I would talk to you about education and training and the lack of skills and technology and all of that. And we should, and we will today. But I also think we just need to sort of reset and refocus on what does it mean to be human? How do we come out of this, as I said, once in a lifetime pandemic, in ways that make us better people, in ways that connect us to others, with stronger bonds, and in ways that recognize that, just like as with climate change, you can't sort of think about your well-being within national borders. You have to think about it as a matter of global solidarity, and that none of us do well unless everybody does well. And so for me, that is almost the immediate focus ahead of the necessary discussion on, as I said, technology and change.
Wow. It's so great to hear about that foundational return to humanity. JP, if you'd like to maybe, I don't know if you'd like to respond to what Jonathan said, or just articulate your own sense of what the priorities are.
I'm very, it's very well spoken in my view, and I so fully agree with it. It's fascinating to me how when we get crises like this, and in a sense, we're all forced into a different way of being, in different isolation, what comes up in ourselves and how much our minds are full of things that seem so desperately important, almost obsessed with them as an internal narrative running through of this thing and this thing and this thing. But when you are confronted with a sort of existential crisis and a health crisis like this that is the same for everybody, a lot changes, and we do need to think about who we are. On one level, we worry more. On another level, we start thinking of different things. And I agree, education and healthcare have to change. But when you look at people who consider what life is, and you think about the Bhutanese with their happiness index, and you know, the Danes with the law of Yanti, you know, where ordinariness is really, really important, you know, where they're excluding yourself from the group. It's not a tribal exclusion. It's just the group thinks and works better together when groups work well together. And so you kind of kill the holy cow of individualism, which is good and bad in the Western world. You start to think about what really makes a decent life. And it's not a decent life living in a country where there are lots of people who are not getting a chance. And it's not about fairness, it's just a chance to be themselves. And that lack of chance is a lack of richness in arts, in relationships, in life, in the quality of what we're living. And in the absence of that sort of connectivity with people, we start seeking all sorts of false gods, money, position, all those things, which are nice to have, but they don't make a quality of living. They don't make a life where everyone has opportunity. And I think life's short. And if we are going to do something, we all need to step up and have a go, in spite of our frailties and our imposter syndromes. We need to get out there and help each other. And in the process, that, if you're doing it properly, you're going to be confronted with so much in yourself. It's like a Zen journey, if you like, of self-discovery. By being activist, you've got to confront what's going on in yourself. I think it's a very rich way to build the world. And I think what's happening now is that we are all reconsidering what we can do in our capability. And we're thinking about things of climate, the life our children want to grow up into. And what are we going to do, actually? What are our children going to say about us and our grandchildren? What are we going to do? And let's have a go. And the joy of it is that we can do this together. In spite of our historic differences, we can now come together and do something which we all agree on, which is make a better life. Let's have a go. I don't know what it is, but I do know we have to try.
So what's interesting is that you both seem to speak quite a lot about it's an opportunity to recalibrate, perhaps reflect, recalibrate. So when we talk about recalibration, often we need anchors or reference points. So let's talk a little bit about leadership. We have to look externally to find, you know, examples, living examples of how we'd like to recalibrate or what we'd like to recalibrate to. So Jonathan, perhaps I could ask you, I mean, you've always been very, very honest about what you think leadership is, kind of how they're doing and what they might not be doing or what they need to do. I think on a global scale, we're watching a lot of leadership issues play out. People on Twitter seem to think that they've become, you know, experts on leadership, they often criticize things in 140 characters. How do you think leadership is doing globally?
I think we're in trouble, in serious trouble, if the most prominent leaders in the world are to be taken as a point of reference. I mean, you know, my adopted country, where both my kids were born, is the United States. I can't tell you how sad I am to see how, in the space of a few years, really, you know, it put in place a leadership that literally destroyed the country, you know, that challenged its democratic institutions, that, you know, made people suspicious of fundamental things like science and the truth. And when you have that in you know, the world's richest country, everything goes wrong. 450,000 people are dead, you know, because of the mismanagement of the virus from the word go, because of denialism, because of science denialism and all of that. We've had our own brush with really horrible leadership, you know, from, think of the many thousands of people who died needlessly, mothers and children, and then Becky science denialism with respect to the HIV virus and so on and so forth. So you know, when you're in that situation that you feel rudderless, and then you begin to look, I think, usefully at not just political leadership at the top, but at ordinary models of leadership around you. So I've often written, in fact, I wrote a book about my mother called The Song for Sarah. And it's a book about her leadership. Here's a woman from a rural area in a Boland town called Montague, who fundamentally transformed my life by her model of leadership. So we grew up in this really dangerous part of the Cape Flats, where you were more likely to go to Baltimore prison or end up in the grassy park, in the Cliff Cemetery, as they call it, than go to university. Right? It was a very high chance, friends all around. And yet I grew up in a bubble, in a working class home, because of a mother who taught you basic things. Now, of course, it's not obvious to you when you're a kid, right? But as you come out of it, you say, oh my goodness, I don't know anybody who worked harder than me. I really don't. I don't know anybody who was absolutely committed to the truth. So whether it was the policeman looking for my activist brother, or whether it was, some gangster trying his luck at our corner home, she would look them both in the eye and tell them the truth, unwavering, fearlessly. So I have learned from the leadership around me, the leadership, right next door to me in the other bedroom, the leadership that carried me for so many years, and so on. And I, having working still in the 9 provinces, with schools, descending on a farming community after the farmer's wife got murdered, and they would spend the evening with the farmer and his family. And we have mass tragedies and so on. I've always showed up there with colleagues and friends to see what leadership is really like on the ground, And the more, I can keep you busy for hours, but the more I walk into leadership that is fearless, that is based on integrity, that does not regard people based on their gender or their race or their national origins, the better I become, I hope, as a human being, So if the collapse of leadership in global terms, in political leadership, is anything to go by, I think we should just stop and look at mothers and look at the local, imam, or look at, that grocer on the corner shop who's kept his family together for dinner. Just look around you. Just look at kids. Look at the Greta Thunberg. Look at ordinary people who, in the quiet of their lives, demonstrate this very felt sense of leadership that we don't necessarily see in the big men.
So it's a beautifully put lesson in where to find leadership. Jon, you've always, JFP, you've always spoken about trying very hard to build better leadership for Africa. I mean, that's always been a guiding thing at Henley. Do you want to chat a bit about, from your point of view, perhaps respond to Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, talking about life stories, I mean, it's kind of weird that you can tell from my accent I'm English, and I was brought up in private schools and whatever. It's on many levels, privileged, very privileged life. And my father was a World War II fighter pilot, ace. And he was never involved. He didn't like business, didn't like politics. He had a warrior ethos. And I was brought up in situations redolent of classism, sexism, racism, nationalism. It was all there. But there was something else beyond it. That class had fought against something that was that Yeatsian beast slouching towards Bethlehem to be born, in that wonderful poem, W.B. Yeats, which is this ghastly fascism that had attacked the world. And I was brought up in the shadow of it, and most of my father's friends died. Many people did, and we were brought up with that around us, and in the Cold War. So while we had all this distortion in our heads and minds, we had the other thing too, which was fighting against fascism. And I've never felt it until I saw the Capitol. I viscerally cringed and growled at Trump and his people. It's just the inhumanity of it all, narcissism. When I saw the Capitol, I realized why a generation of, if you like, privileged people in the African context fought another generation of privileged people. Why? Because there's a great evil that is requiring us to fight. And it's a dehumanizing thing. So I learned a lot of things like that from my father and from my background, while I was still navigating, this eternal realization that I'm brought up, I have racism, I have classism, I have these things. Where did that come from? And the sheer embarrassment and of discovering these things in myself, you know, and that was just horrible. But at the same time, my God, I found what the problem is. You know, I've seen this, I can see the animal now. Can I get away from this? And then I went a strange journey in my life where I dumped all my background and became a sort of hippie and traveled around in a Hindu ashram in my 20s, very, very different. Loads of men. I didn't have to do it, I chose to. So it was a different journey. What happened in that process was this sense of rediscovering the humanity that those separations, the otherisms had taken away from me, the energy, the creativity, the passion, the love, just the humanity of all these people from different backgrounds. And it was a huge gift, not something that I have lived up to ever, but it just changed me and changed my view of what life should be and what opportunity was, what I wanted my children to be like. You know, not to have, you know, grow a life without those infestations you then try and unpack for the rest of your life. And then you ended up just looking eye to eye with everybody. And the eye to eye looking with everybody is that we're all human. I mean, I spent some time in New Zealand. I love that because everyone in New Zealand looks each other in the eye. And if you try and have airs and graces, they don't like you. It doesn't matter what you are. You've got it. They escaped from the British caste and class system, and they don't want to have any more of it. Thank you very much. And if you can't be equal, you're nothing. And I love that. And coming to Africa for me, I've been here, 25 years? I was here another 6 years, and I worked across Africa for another 6 years. It was like frozen bits of myself were unfreezing from the sheer humanity of it all. And it doesn't make you feel big, it makes you feel little, but also makes you feel kind of angry because now you're seeing people trapped in these concepts. The concept of colonialism is, it's fine, but when you feel it, and the people you like and are working with and enjoying being with, and they're giving you things, love and care and stimulation and inspiration, when you see what happened to them, you think, no more, thank you very much. At least we can have a go at not making that happen again. And then you start seeing what's around you. And what we see in South Africa are talented people. Our MBA students, our MBA students, so they do an MBA that's assessed internationally by international markers. They don't know who they are. We were 20% Black African, 20% women, 30% Black Africans when we started. We're about 75% Black Africans now, 55% women on our MBA. They get assessed internationally with the Danes, the Brits, the French, the Malaysians, whatever, Germans. And our South Africans do as well, if not better, in these blind assessments and all that lot. So we've got all the talent we want in this country. And I think the history, I think the history has made people doubt themselves intellectually as well. I think they do. And I think whether we like to say it, it's what the colonization of the mind or whatever, I think our job is to give people confidence and believe and understand their minds are amazing. And that's what we need to do here. And we need different voices saying that because it's fact. It's not like an aspiration or an emotional wish to redress the past. It's the reality. People are really, really smart in Africa, and most of them don't think so. That's what we've got to change, I think. So
I'm sure we can agree that the damage, the psychological damage of structural kind of oppression is incredibly massive. And when the oppressed starts to believe that their own PR, it's incredibly hard to fix. So that's really interesting. What emerges from the last comments is it's interesting to see both of your journeys being so remarkably different and yet somehow arriving at very similar realizations. And that says two things to me. One is that, when something is true, it simply is true. And, it's not something you invented. It's just the universal law, this humanity idea. And the other one is, I think we must just, pay some tribute to the individual. Now, I'm not suggesting that the individual has to be born a certain way in order to reach a certain conclusion. But I do think an intention in that individual to seek and to find and to be open to the truth. So the reason I'm asking you that is those are two beautiful stories and full of wisdom. And I'm sure when we play this back, there's lots to learn. But how can we encourage people listening to adopt an attitude? First of all, I think we need to create a market for better leaders. In other words, we should provide followers for better leaders and support for better leaders, because I'm sure it's exhausting being a good leader in a bad environment. And so how do we become better at selecting the leaders we would like to kind of resonate with? that will be the first question. And then maybe we can talk a little bit about the personal work once we've found the true north, how we head for it. But how do we select the better leaders, Jonathan, in the selection we have? Because we certainly have some, to John's point, to JFP's point, we have some remarkable South Africans, not just the iconic, the Mandelas that have passed, and the very big, famous South Africans, but we have your mum, for example, has raised an excellent leader, in her own way. So how do we find those people and how do we elevate them?
Well, I was absolutely intrigued by John's, by JP's life story in brief, and mainly because of its honesty. It's very difficult to particularly for white South Africans, if we belong, to be honest about, who we are and how we came to be and all of that. And that is the beginning of wisdom. That is the beginning of change. That is the beginning of leadership. The second thing he said that really strikes a chord with is that when you teach a class, whether it is grade 1 kids, or Henley MBA students, I guarantee you, if you teach them well, and if you teach them with that sense of what he calls rebuilding the confidence of learners, the leaders will emerge. You don't have to have a module on leadership. The leaders will emerge. They will want to do things. They will want to take charge. They will want to break into communities and help solve the engineering problem with wastewater or, and I've seen this. I've taught in a dozen universities, around the world. I can tell you now, if you have the kind of leadership in the instructor, in the teacher, that is not just words, but the modeling of leadership, you don't have to worry. The Mandelas will arise from these little Cape. My mother will arise from Montague. It's just going to happen. And so, but I always sort of remind people, that learning is a dependent variable, and I think this is so true when it comes to looking for leadership. So now it does help if you also structure opportunities in ways that leaders find, the space in which to exercise their talents. So, for example, we created at the University of Free State something called the Leadership for Change program, in which we took every year about 100 to 200 of the most talented first years and put them out of the country into completely strange environments, from Tokyo, Japan to Manhattan in New York City to rural parts of the Netherlands and so on. And we told our colleagues there, give them an experience that they've never had before. These are our potential leaders and so on. Now, of course, there's a lot of preparatory work going forward, but there's also a lot of continuing work when they return. So you identify the leaders as they rise and you create opportunity. The Peace Corps, one of the most powerful concepts, I think, in youth leadership, was really a structure that J.F. Kennedy created in order for young people to go out across the world, and preach the developing gospel, if you will, and so on. So on a small scale, on a big scale, a planetary scale, our role is to identify the leaders as they emerge and make it possible for them to become. Now, let me also say this. In creating leadership opportunities, it's very important to realize that human beings, let's talk about students for a moment, are all good at something. Okay. Not everybody is going to be the science and math student. You've got to create leadership opportunities. Not everybody is going to be the IT student that becomes Elon Musk. Not everybody is going to be, our model of the really rich and successful people measured by Bezos or, the Apple guy and so on and so forth. So for me, one of the beauties of leadership is to also recognize the arts and drama student, is to also recognize the philanthropists, within the student body, is to also recognize the spiritual leaders. Let's not forget spiritual. I don't mean Christian, faith necessarily. I also mean those who take up leadership within Islam, take up leadership within the Hindu faith, take up leadership within the Jewish community and so on. So I have seen my students morph into leaders in so many different ways, provided we understand that leadership is not one thing and that goodness expresses itself in so many, many different ways. So to summarize, we have two duties. One is to recognize the leadership as it emerges through good teaching, such as demonstrated by Jon, and secondly, create opportunities for that leadership to flourish.
Thanks, Jon. JFP, I mean, I know that this is a big topic for you, and we'd love to hear your thoughts.
It's inspiring to hear. Thank you, Jansen. It really is. I mean, I know people say you're inspiring, but funny, when people call you inspiring, it's nice, but it always makes me put me on edge a bit. It makes me say I should do more. Not that people often call me inspiring, but certainly with Jonathan, it makes me, oh God, I should really do a lot more than this. Really, have I really started? I think it's true. I mean, we had some other podcasts with Faith Popcorn where we talked about kindness. And it was very fascinating because kindness works on multiple levels. It's just a personal kindness, giving when you don't want to, all that. But there's small K kindness and big K kindness to me. One is the kindness where you do people around yourself, but the other kindness is, you could have other names for it. Corruption is a deeply unkind act. It's deeply, deeply unkind. It always takes two to corrupt. It's all very well for somebody pointing fingers at the corporate, pointing fingers at government, or government pointing fingers, or the people pointing fingers at Africa or China. There's always somebody else. And I used to work for a large corporate that was fined, not me, thank goodness, fined a large amount of money for its activities internationally in engaging in wrong practices. So corruption is really demonic. And what people don't understand is that the people who suffer from corruption are the poorest. Always the poorest, because the money that they need, schools and whatever, is not given to them. And they are therefore most vulnerable. And because they haven't had access to frameworks of thinking quite often, very clever people socially, but they're easily seduced, if you like, by populist theories, conspiracy theories, whatever. Because where you get to the point of what you know, you want to make some certainty. And if you don't understand something, you start reaching out for conspiracy theories or whatever. So the lack of education, the lack of access, the increase of corruption is an awful trap for highly talented people who are caught in poverty. And those are people we all need, apart from the fact that they're us, they're no different from us. They're you and me, they absolutely are. They have the possibility to grow prosperous societies, through their talents and capabilities. And corruption destroys that, and it also creates role models of people who seem to be beneficial by feeding some of the money back into societies, or by demonstrating wealth from having come from the backgrounds. It's a terrible thing. We have to reframe that. So another part of education, I think, is we have to tell the stories of what the causality of corruption is. It's not just the fat cats taking and corporate, not signing off those accounts or whatever, or signing off the one that shouldn't be. That money is taken from somebody else, and that is tax money. It should be paid for somebody to help somebody's life. But the corruption reduces the amount of money available, spends it badly, produces poor outcomes, and it's always the poorest who suffer. We need a crusade against that, not corruption per se, but the thinking and the value set that allows that thing. We need to tell stories in cartoons, in populist ways. We need to motivate and energize celebrities to engage about what it does, to talk about it. And we need to create new role models. And I think the power of the story needs to be something. Even in COVID, the announcements come from the government and the president. People don't trust that. And we need that gravitas, but you need something else. You need to activate the storytellers across societies to tell the story, put on your masks. So when I talk about big K kindness and big E education, is those are the things that education and kindness need to do. There's a warrior ethos It's something you put yourself up. It doesn't look like kindness when you're fighting against something. It looks like you're being aggressive, but you're fighting for a cause that matters. That, I think, is big K kindness. And I think that's what education and leadership needs to do more. It's very seductive because you can find yourself in that. You can feel like a leader. And go back to New Zealand. The moment you feel big, you need to just ask yourself, now, who are you really? You know, what's your daughter saying about you? You know, go home to, oh, Dad, you're part of the patriarchy. You know, you cause, you know, this is why we have Me Too, Dad. And I said, what, me? Yeah, okay, fair deal. Okay, and then you have to reduce yourself to size all the time if you're going to be effective in leadership, I think, you know, while maintaining your competence.
So that's really, well, no, John, I think you mentioned something so important about the energy and the effort. And it's interesting to hear you both talk about leadership in terms of, Jonathan, on your side, two particular tasks that almost become a responsibility. So to recognize leadership and allow it to emerge and then support its development. And John, to focus on the big K kindness. And what strikes me is that there are many South Africans, particularly privileged, who will donate money, or a corporation who will commit acts of CSI. And I say commit acts because in some ways they're buying credits to do something that's not good. And what we don't do is, we don't enforce within ourselves the diligence to follow the chain. In other words, from the act of corruption to the dead person, or the damaged family, or the ruined community. We don't see that line because we're able to buy our way out of having a conscience. What I've learned from educating myself is there is a level of rigor and diligence that needs to be applied in the act of education. It's not simply an opportunity that puts information in your head, because that's not an education, that's a memory. If you're going to use your education and be useful and contribute, you have to work harder, you have to sleep less, you have to give more, you have to sacrifice, you have to commit your brain to this stuff. And I feel the same way about your big K, and perhaps to Jonathan's suggestion that we need to prepare the ground for leaders to emerge. We all need to contribute. And I think that's what I'd like to ask next is, what can we all do as individuals? Because there's a difference between a display of power and leadership. And we are seeing a lot of displays of power around the world, and people gravitating either against it or for it in a binary kind of reaction. But in order to foster us to be ready to recognize leadership when it emerges in a mom's conversation or a friend's gesture or a community leader's request, how do we start to get ourselves better at putting our energy into preparing the ground for better leaders? Jonathan, how do you think we can all help?
Yeah, forgive me for being a fairly traditional, having a very traditional understanding of emergent leadership and how to demonstrate leadership. So I really don't believe in high-level seminars and thick books and all of that stuff. I mean, it has its place, of course. But I really do believe in modeling leadership, okay? I mean, the fact that I never, ever saw, it's a simple thing, but I never ever saw in a working class family where there was a lot of pressure on us financially and so on. I never saw my father raise his voice, let alone his hand, in the direction of my mother. That is has a powerful impact on you as a child and later on as a leader, because you realize that. So the first time I saw a couple fight, I had to get counseling. I didn't know what was going on, etc. I tell that story because of you are unaware of the fact as a leader, whether you're in a school or in a company, a private company or in government, you're unaware of the fact that there's eyes watching you all the time, okay? And the things you do, more than the things you say, have a very powerful effect on those who learn from you about how to be, okay? So as the Vice Chancellor of a university with, at that point, 33,000 students, I knew that every day I walked onto one of those three campuses, there were 33,000 pairs of eyes, okay, looking at me. Now, fortunately, by that time, it was for me to have in my team that I selected women, gay people, black people, white people, Afrikaans speakers, Sesotho speakers. That was something I did as a habit, But I became very aware of the fact that there were demonstrating that fact was much more potent in reaching most of my students in terms of how they would behave. And so making my team, so when people came to my home, my children, for example, you know, they can't understand this thing called race. They really can't, okay? And even though they were raised as fairly mainstream Baptist Christian kind of kids, when they opened their eyes in our house, there were gay people, there were straight people, there were Christians, there were Muslims, there was unbelievers, there were, you know, there were white people, there were black people, they were foreigners, they were locals. And so for them, the world is straightforward, you know, and so my wife in particular has been a very powerful force in carrying those values over to them without ever giving a lecture, okay? So I think that, you know, again, it sounds old-fashioned, eh? But I don't think South Africans really understood deeply what it meant for Nelson Mandela to put on a number 6 jersey of Francois Pienaar, the flank, and walk onto a stadium at a time that the country could have gone either way, you know? But the power, as Frederick van Zyl-Slabbert said in his book, The Last South African Parliament, he said, you know, he was in that stadium at Ellis Park, and he says, as Mandela walked onto the field, there were 2 guys who looked like they were dressed as AWB henchmen, and the one turned to the other with tears rolling down his eyes, and he said, "Daar loop my president. There goes my president." You know, my God, do you know how powerful that is in the lives of ordinary people? I have seen hard redneck kids from the rural Free State. I've seen very militant black students, you know, believed every white person was a racist by definition. I've seen many of them, not all, but I've seen many of them change simply by virtue of how my team, not me, but how my team demonstrated that leadership. I think the reason people look up to Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, the reason so many people around the world admire, you know, Chancellor Merkel in Germany, is because of the power of their example, not just to the native population, but across the world, because they stand in such contrast as leaders to what we see in many other places. So yeah, forgive me, but I'm a traditionalist. I really believe in the power of exemplarity in moving people, okay, to become leaders themselves.
Sure. I mean, it's a sobering thought, because we are kind of taught to be cynical as a defense, and maybe that gets in the way of learning. You know, perhaps just some good old-fashioned humanity is a deeply profound educator, and it's a great thought. You know, that idea of that story about the AW member, it didn't go the way I thought it was going to go, and it's a beautiful surprise ending. So John, you've always spoken about being a business school that would like to be more activist about good corporate citizenry, and just on maybe, you know, developing what Jonathan's been talking about. How do we prepare the ground for better leaders? Or how do we prepare people to raise the energy to begin that choice of either emerging as good leaders or choosing better leaders?
Well, that's such a beautiful story, Jansen. I can hardly think after that. Thank you. But it brought up a couple of things to me. I'll come back to that thought, John.
Sure.
I mean,
Sure.
My dad also was a great modeler of leadership. I was also brought up in a house where there was no, you know, very managed anger, if there was any, but very controlled, no hint of sort of abuse or anything, and a very strong modeling of leadership. It was fundamental within it. And I think that has a huge effect. When I did my MBA in Ashridge in the UK, there was the dean there was called Philip Sadler, a great tall guy who stalked around the grounds and told stories about Middle English family structures, which were hilarious to the MBA students. But every time he saw me, he would stop and he'd say, "Hi, John, how are you?" And he would just stop and talk. And he's 92 now, and I'm a Facebook friend, and I continually tell him stories about, you know, you never knew who I was, but let me tell you the effect you had on me. And I think the modeling is fantastic. And when we look at people like Mandela or Tuli Madonsela or Obama and you, Jonathan, you know, I think what happens with that sort of leadership is little seeds fall off them, little seeds of mini Mandelas or mini people they fall. And you can either allow that to grow in you in your own way, not to be like a Mandela, but it's a provocation. You know, this has landed in you. Are you going to go with that or not? And this sort of gene pool, the DNA of those leaders doesn't die off with them. They've been scattering on you all the time. Now you can either go with it or not. So if you want to be a leader, go with it. You know, because it's going to terrify you. It's going to make you feel you're going to confront your own ego, your own demons, whatever it is. But just go with it, because it's a better example. So where does that energy come from in corporate activism? You've got to understand causality. We're trained to think in very narrow, short-term causalities, profits, quarters. You know, the Native Americans think of 7th-generation decisions. It's a tradition. So what's your 7th-generation decision here? So when you're sitting there in that corporate world and you make a decision for, oh, we're going to lose our profits, we're going to have to lay off people, your mind immediately myopic is sitting there, and you don't go beyond the boundaries. And we're not teaching people to think of consequences. I used to be an airline pilot, actually, funnily enough. And one of the things that airline pilots do is, as airline captains crash their airplanes and kill their passengers. It doesn't happen very often. It's unbelievably rare. You're much safer in the terminal than you are on the airplane, by the way. No, you're much safer in the airplane than you are on the terminal. Just get that right. And the reason is that pilots catch mistakes early, and they have a command and control. They have something called pace. And so when something goes wrong, firstly they probe P. Shouldn't you be going? So they just say, we're going at 137 knots, Captain. And the captain says, yeah, sure. Okay, the alert. We're going at 137 knots, decreasing. Our stall speed is 120. Okay, no response. And then you challenge. You say, Captain, we're going at 130 knots, decreasing. We're going to stall in 30 seconds unless you do something about it. Do something about it, please. That's the challenge. And then when the final, the E is just you execute. You say, Captain, I have control. You know, and you take over the airplane. Now, that doesn't happen in corporate life. We're all too scared. We need to pace. We need to probe. And we need to create that dynamic. In the aircraft cockpits, they change the dynamic so that the co-pilots are equal. There's a command and response. And when things go wrong, you have to follow this. You have to follow this challenge. We need to institute processes like that in our training. So we make challenge. We reduce the power distance. You know, power, these hierarchies of power, whether they're charismatic power or imagined power, these hierarchies are deadly for safety and for equality. We've got to change the dynamic. And the thing that I think for people, what leaders do, good leaders do, everyone's got a journey of self-discovery, which is often painful. Good leaders just make it feel worth it because they're exuding something that you want to be, which is somehow at ease with life. And they, you know, you're engaging with a hard life, but it's still worth it. And they exude that sense that life is worth it. And I think that's what great leaders do. They exude not a positivity, not a hype, but just they're somehow, God, this is, yeah, come on, just get on with it. Have a go too. You know, and they're encouraging people to get off and have a go in small ways. And they just somehow make it possible. And I think that's the beauty of people like that. And that's why we revere them so much, because they're not modeling an ideal that we can't reach. They're just, we know that we can be like that. They know that we can be like that. That's what they're, and that's what they do to us. So I think what you can do as a leader is just, you know, relax and have a go and trust in the right leaders, you know. That's how I think. Yeah. But thank you.
That's actually a very, thank you. I feel a lot more, you know, comfortable about flying in a plane with that very, very powerful story. But, you know, as you spoke, John, I just thought of something that I, you know, if I was in your position as a leader in a business school, may I encourage you anyway to consider this as a case study. I've been racking my brains, you know, around how the invasion of the US Capitol building happened. And I mean, that's a case study in leadership, in hierarchical decisions gone wrong. So what appears to have happened is that everybody down the chain would not make the decision unless the person, right, that is to call the National Guard, to bring in extra, security. Nobody would make that call because of the fear, obviously, of offending up the chain. The result is 7 people are dead, and the US confidence in its own institutions took a massive knock. And it struck me as you talked about the gradual transition of power, of authority in that cockpit, to that somebody made the call that for the safety of the passengers, okay, I've got to be courageous enough, okay, to go against whatever the captain is or isn't doing. Now, as you know, John, that there are stories or cases of how in certain Asian countries, the absolute power of the pilot was tragedy, okay, because you dare not question up the chain and so on and so forth. And that brings me, John, to the question of courage in leadership. I don't know of any leadership that doesn't, in critical situations, take decisions that might offend others, that might go, against the grain of protocol, but that must be made in, for example, right now, it's very clear to me in political leadership that somebody needs to tell the former president, end of story. Except you see this sort of dancing around this charismatic former president because nobody has the courage to take leadership. And the thing that we did in the Free State, I can tell you now, it was a huge risk to in response to the situation on the ground, offer forgiveness, and advance reconciliation that would bring together those 4 white students with the 5 black workers. The workers and the students were fine in coming together, but the political risk on the outside was huge, and it was the right thing to do. And so whether it's on that small scale in central South Africa, or whether it's in the pilot's cockpit, or whether it's in the US Capitol building, what we also need to teach leaders is not systems maintenance only. I love systems maintenance. I love the HR and finance guys who can, make sure that everything is going well. But I also like the leader that says in a crisis, you're going to have to do something different here, okay? And you're going to have to be courageous for the sake of the bigger cause, whether it's the economic well-being of the country or the health of its people.
So there you have it. That was probably the most privileged conversation I've ever been part of. And what strikes me every time we do one of these sessions, I cannot believe the quality of the chat. We've got a couple of 100 people in the room. We're partially in South Africa. This is where we sort of generate the conversation from. So far, we see a lot of support, a lot of questions, no kind of posturing, no arguing. It's a beautiful thing. It's very hard for me to find conversations like this. So you have to go and create them. I often find when we go to social gatherings or we go online, as many of you have referenced in the chat, what I find is tropes, and a lot of them are misinformed. It's not about your thoughts, it's about the position, your default position, and why that's superior to someone else's default position, instead of watching what I consider to be a beautiful amorphous kind of organic thinking that's going on. I can see human brains chewing through important issues, and that's fantastic. And that's why when I finish what I'm doing now, I intend to carry on and do a doctorate. I don't understand why I wouldn't continue to learn. I picked up a couple of issues. So what I'll do is I'm just going to read out the big clumps of stuff that I seem to find coming up, and you'll find that they're not very granular. I'm trying to clump them in sort of broad categories, because I think that's what's important. I think once we get into the granular detail in a 1.5 hour session. I think we've kind of lost the point because it's such a big topic. But modeling came up a lot, and there was talk of it happening earlier, and there was some PhD reference about some research happening in the home. It came up in education. Interestingly, it didn't come up where we all go tomorrow, work. It didn't come up, and that's interesting to me, because we spend a great deal of our lives in our working environment. And how can we perhaps, we talk about politicians, that came up, people on the poster. The poster children, those are our accountable leaders. Surely my manager, my direct supervisor, my next line report is equally important. And do I examine them? Do I hold them to the same level of accountability? Or do we decide that when you're very much in charge, then it's very important, that you're kind of ethical? So that's interesting to me. So modeling was quite important. The idea that we have a common understanding, a code that allows us to share our definition of ethics. And that's a very interesting one to me, because we are referencing country leaders, a lot of the references. And I fully understand that as South African citizens, we are deeply disillusioned with leadership at the moment. But I invite you to look at many countries in the world right now. There's a great deal of leadership, kind of distrust, and sometimes blind allegiance. Somebody spoke about the strongman leader theme that's coming out. So we are bruised. We're very sensitive. So we kind of throw our kind of ammo at that kind of leadership. But perhaps if we all believe it starts kind of closer to home, maybe we need to kind of bring that lens in. It's very easy for us to kind of do that. And the more I learn as I study is that when you're involved in politics, it's not like running a corporation, it's running town hall, and not something I'd like to be involved in, because it's not the kind of person I am. I vote for other people that I don't like either, actually. Broadly, I understand what they kind of stand for and what I hope they're going to do. But on a deep level, I understand that we all concentrate our power in a small group of people. And when they get that power, the tendency throughout history in the world is that the power warps that individual, so that there's a misalignment with what they told us they were going to do until we gave them our power. So the idea for me, just as an individual, is that democracy is a very good illusion to keep people under control. But really what it is it's another concentration of power. I'm more a fan of the village model. At Henley, we talk about the village a lot. We reference the Henley life. I think it's up there somewhere. And we talk about trying to raise the people in our ecosystem the way a village might do it. So where power is distributed, leadership is distributed. You constantly find that if you hold a lot of power, you give it away. Because ultimately, if we define ethics on a very granular level, so we really kind of pin it to our most sacred belief system. For example, our religious framework, if we pin it too closely, and we've seen this in South Africa, our Chief Justice, by all accounts, a very good legal mind, has come a bit close on a couple of occasions to kind of allowing his personal beliefs to color his public statements. And while of course you should be allowed to express your faith, your belief, and we have a constitution that, encourages you and protects you in doing that. When you start to gravitate towards a legal position, you come to that very old kind of idea of the church and the state, for example. And so it becomes a little bit more tricky. And the reason I mention that is, if we define those things on a very granular level, we run the risk of finding somebody else that's outside of our set of beliefs as being not worthy of our ethics, or not deserving. And that's a very dangerous line. I always say that the way I test my constitution and how brilliant it is I watch how it protects the people I don't agree with. I don't believe you should test your constitution on how well it protects everything that you believe in, but because that's too simple. The test is when I don't believe in what someone is saying, how well are we looking after that person? So it's an idea of complex definitions and management of ethics. If you look at really good sort of global leaders, I know it's a very well-known example, but if you look at Jacinda Ardern and her kind of way of managing diversity and complexity, young person. I saw, I think Moshin was talking about the younger generations and all being on, I'm the father of a sort of a late-aged teen, and I've many times been frustrated. But what I've learned over time is that she's developing skills that I may never have. So while her channels frustrate me, and a lot of the stuff is garbage, if I turn on television this evening, I'm probably going to find a lot of garbage as well. If I hang around on the internet without really curating myself, I'm probably going to end up looking at garbage as well. So So I wonder if it's about going back to traditional books or whether it's introducing better content through the channels that people will engage with. And perhaps that's why many startups now suddenly have meteoric values, because they know how to speak to a great deal of people very quickly. So there was that. Somebody mentioned consequences. And, we've got to think about accountability. I think that's very important. It's a very important point. We always have to be careful, though, when we talk about consequences. Are we looking for vengeance? I'm going to talk very quickly about Oscar Pistorius, that famous trial that we were given the sort of open window on, and many South Africans instantly became lawyers because they were demanding, they wanted to see the evidence, and never for once thinking that you're not entitled to see the evidence. It's not your trial, and you're not a lawyer unless you are, in which case, but even then, you're not the one under instruction. So we suddenly wanted genetic evidence, and we wanted the record, and we wanted the witness to talk more. Suddenly we became we reached in our role. We were given a window in order to watch our justice system at work. We weren't invited to become a mob. And so when we talk about consequences, it's quite interesting. I always find that perhaps self-examination, self-ethics, what are the consequences on me? And it becomes quite interesting if I find myself guilty of hatred, for example. What is the damage on myself? And I'm a bit more of a data-driven human being. So I tend to not get too emotional on these things. I look at the actual impact on myself of expressing hatred. And that's quite an interesting idea about consequences. A lot of talk about beginning at home. And I love the story that Prof. Jansen mentioned, a beautiful story of his mother being this very quiet, tiny scale, important leader, because her quiet, behavior-driven, not what she said, but what she did, provided us with Prof. Jansen in the long run. And he recognizes that. Just to see a mother build a child, a father who never, ever modeled violence against his partner. There's a lot of talk about gender-based violence, a very real issue. But interesting that we have that. We have the complexity of being raised in a country where, on the side that I come from, deeply, deeply guilty of going out of their way to engineer, out of our way, let me own that, to engineer psychological, social damage to people, and then wonder why there's trauma all over, why we have this kind of bad modeling going on in school, why we have difficulty in power structures. Now we want to blame essentially the victims of intergenerational trauma. And I'm not suggesting for one moment that that's fine, but it's a reality and it's endemic. So Nsiki saying, I learned dolus eventualis from Oscar's trial. Absolutely. So you see, you learn something, which is the point of justice being seen to be done. You understood the process and what it means. So there's a good example. There was a great comment about disrupting power. And I feel that was quite interesting, because often we allow the hopelessness of what's gone before to form a pattern where we're not able to see beyond the current situation. So perhaps some kind of disruption, and I invite you to look back in history. It happens all the time. It's called revolution, and generally it's where everyone on the ground has enough. Prof. Jansen speaks beautifully about something called the moral underground. He believes that there is this glue, and I don't believe it's his original idea. It was written about by another academic, and he resonated with it. And it's something beautiful that I've taken away from listening to the Prof on several occasions. But he believes that there's a moral glue that holds this country together, and it's in homes like his mum's, where people don't necessarily have a voice or a great deal of money, but what they have access to is the children that they're raising, and they model, never mind the injustice, never mind the trauma and the suffering. There is this commitment to investing in the moral underground, and he believes that that's what's held our country together. We all know that this country survived incredible opportunities to go into disarray, and every time the people have held it together. And you've all spoken at length and eloquently about leaders that have let us down. And I can't agree more. And I think it's a complex set of circumstances that's led us to this place. But I also think that we sometimes we pass off our own responsibility in order to point at, we need a poster child, and then we can kind of, we get absolution from our own sins. I myself used to try and get out of paying traffic fines. It's something I stopped many years ago. I felt so guilty about it because I can't complain about the police being, corrupt, if I am one of those people who secretly believes that it's okay for me to do it. So that's another thing. And that's why I asked that question about, are we the kind of followers that, great leaders would choose? Or do great leaders not give up on followers who need help? So these are just questions that I'm asking. And then the final thing for me was a simple insight that towards the end of the conversation, both men, deeply capable of complexity, deeply, deeply interesting about Mushin saying, John, stop breaking the law. I've stopped, I think, but I'm also aware of the fact that I'm a living example of a hypocrite. And I'm taught this constantly by my 19-year-old daughter. So Mushin, I'll try and balance them, but it's an interesting one. And so the idea of eventually what it comes to is very simple. It's being aware, looking for signs of leadership early on, supporting, developing, nurturing. Kindness came out as a very strong idea. Prof Jansen, on the one hand, kind to an AWB member. Now, it might seem like a betrayal of some kind to some people, and I understand why. It's a hurtful place of hatred that person has chosen to gravitate towards. But his answer to that is kindness, and what an incredible idea. Accountability. He's prepared to answer as to why he would do that. I've just seen Wesley agreeing with Daniel, leaders' acceptance to be questioned. So do things that can be questioned. Why be afraid of being questioned? It's a very interesting a question. Mushin, I can see that you're an absolute optimist. There's always hope to see people change. And Vinesh, I think creating opportunity for a diverse workforce. Absolutely, equity. This is why I was asking the question, because it immediately became obvious to me that nobody was talking about corporate leadership. And there's a very important question here. I'd love to see your answers. Do we feel that there's a different set of values that corporate leaders can assume? Because ultimately their goal is growth and profit. If we are to go on the sort of, traditional business model idea, I think it's Friedman, value creation. So does that mean that they're allowed? Versus politicians who need to make our lives better in some way, if we believe the kind of idealistic idea. So is there a different set of goals, ethics or standards to which we hold corporate leadership? Because what's just been mentioned by Vinesh is so important. Who decides how diverse a workforce? Do we have to wait for, legislation from government to tell us that our workforce should be diverse? Personally, I don't need a law to tell me about murder. That's wrong. I don't think that I would like to murder anyone because it's just not cool. And I'm sorry that that's oversimplistic, but the idea is that now we then find companies who are, skilled at helping you to find ways around broad-based Black economic empowerment. And so now because it's legitimate, that's okay. It's still the same evil utility. You are robbing people of opportunity, but because it's legitimized. So now I just want to ask that question is, do the same ethics apply to all leaders, or do we have categories of ethics? And that's quite interesting. There we go, Mushin. Having a great product that's bad for society is not good for business. Alice is saying no different set of ethics is required. The issues apply to the status quo in our corporates. Exactly. But is a status quo not a form of ethical, enforcement? Because that's quite an interesting thing. If we say, well, everyone else is doing it. See, we love whistleblowers, but if we look at history, the issue is that we tend to not like whistleblowers, people who stand up and tell the truth. We like them afterwards. But generally we form a mob and we try to harm that person. If you look at the pattern throughout history, we generally end up, publicly harming them, and later we raise monuments to them. So there is this interesting idea that we struggle to process true ethical stuff. And that's why the conversation, I think, around, first of all, educating yourself, which requires quite a great deal of, intense effort, which is what activism is. And I think someone just raised that idea as well. We need Paul, thank you, Paul. We need to repeat that activism word. Exactly. It's a commitment. It's energy dedicated to that. And that's why I mentioned earlier on in my conversation that we generally need activists in our ecosystem. Many people write them off, and I'll use a very kind of emotive example. Julius Malema, throughout his whole career, has been a big activist, and what I like about him is he's a provocateur. I may not agree with everything he says or does because he's a politician, and so by definition, I shouldn't just go with everything he says. That would be naive of me as well as a follower. But what's very important for me as a South African is that Julius Malema, if nothing else, broke a very important power lock in this country. And that was the power held by elderly Black politicians. He opened it up for a new generation in Parliament, and he kicked that door down quite heavily. Now that's an important change in our system. So I appreciate that we've got to bring activism in, and we've got to foster it because it brings energy. Most of us don't really want to be activists. We'd like to just, back to your word there, status quo. It's called that for a reason. It's fueled by all of us. The majority form that. So we've got to be a little bit more whistleblower. We've got to be a little bit more activist in our own. You see, they can't stop everyone. That's why revolutions work. I know they're messy. Well, obviously, there's so much energy so quickly, and it's not always very carefully directed. But it does. It creates a change, not always a perfectly articulated change, not a perfectly achieved change. Sometimes it replaces bad people with other bad people or wrong people. However, it does change things in the system. So Paul, I think that's a very important point. Ethics and integrity, says Linda. I think this is a good point. Ethics and integrity need to form part of the leadership framework when hiring, not just assessing competencies. Especially now with uncertainty from COVID, the ability to ethically lead people through uncertainty, ambiguity, and complexity, not just managing a P&L. I couldn't agree more. And that's why earlier on, that fantastic hashtag, and I hope you all take this away and that we make it important online, leaving this event, is to make ethics a STEM level subject. And someone said, STEM, I think, or STEAM, and that's a great idea. So we should agree on a hashtag. So if anybody wants to put a hashtag in that you think we should all use, let's start our activism here in this group. And we could put that hashtag online and say that's what we got out as a group, is that we think that ethics belong in that group of sort of revered subjects. Like, it's fundamental, right? It's a really important thing. And so that's important. The other thing I just want to mention before I stop blabbing is resonance. This idea that we gravitate towards leaders that we somehow agree with. I think resonate's a better word than resonate. Resonate's a better word because we respond in a way that sometimes we don't even understand. A good example of that in a negative way is Brexit. Many people resonated with the idea of Brexit. The problem was they didn't quite know what it all entailed. And now that's caused a very long and complicated situation for many people. But I think we do resonate. And so perhaps we need to start resonating what we're looking for. And we can start at home. I love that idea because if nothing else, 170 odd people could resonate tonight and start doing something about the way that we process gender-based violence in our own homes, for example. Just that. Tolerance, which I don't like, by the way. I don't like the word tolerance. Tolerance to me is a very elitist word. It's almost like I will accept you in my superior space because I'm better. I don't like that at all. I like accept. I like welcome. I like those kind of things. So that's important. So let's see. Is it possible, says Gavin, that ethics are grounded and measured against broader societal values? It may be that our ethical standpoint is framed by societal aspirations and values. Equity values, women receiving the vote for the first time less than 100 years ago. What does that say about the societies over the millennia prior to that? Couldn't agree more. Absolutely. Bronwyn, great word. Embrace. Embrace is a great word. I'm glad we don't talk about tolerance. It's a horrible word. It's very, it's not good. It's just very, it's condescending. We've spoken quite a bit about young people and where it all begins. And then, of course, education. So I think we've covered that with our home sort of micro-modeling leadership amongst parents. And then, of course, at school, maybe making ethics a very important part of the curriculum. That's quite important. I hope there are any educators who are watching this who have any influence. would be great if you could make that happen. So that's important. I'm supposed to open up for comments. Wonke, did you want to say something? Because I can see your camera's on and I'd be very happy to let you have a comment. Would you like to say something? You're more than welcome to, but you don't have to either. Okay, that's cool. That's fine. Okay, Linda, you're an educator. Bronwyn, you're an educator. You know, perhaps we could do something. What I'll do is I'm going to download this entire chat. For me, brilliant. Just this brilliant group of minds working on this issue and chewing it over and giving each other input. And here's a good one for the educators, and perhaps this is for policymakers. In Australia, the retirement age was increased to around 70 to create mentorship for up-and-coming leaders. Again, back to Linda, good. We will get something going. I'm going to give you my email address, and you can email me at any moment, and I'll stay in touch. I don't know what we'll do, but we'll do something. The village. In the village, there is an absolute place for elders as much as there's a place for youth. If you look at the ANC's classical structure, there's the senior leadership, and always there was the youth league, always allowing that energy to be developed all the time. And that's good. Okay, Alice, you can join us. I'll copy you in. And then Jonette, you had your hand up. Please go ahead and speak if you want to.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Hi, John. So
Hi.
An idea that I've been playing with after attending a Lead with Humanity event, online event, is that not everyone understands ethics. I can guarantee you, if I say Gucci, everybody knows what I mean. But if I say honesty, what does honesty mean to you and what does honesty mean to someone else? And in my head, I drive along a road like on Deckers on the West Rand. And as I'm driving down the road, in my mind, I see billboards that say honesty in 11 different languages with an explanation of what honesty is. And in a month's time, the word is ethics. And down the line, it tells me in 11 different languages so that everybody, when we're talking about ethics, we all understand what the word means. When we speak honesty, we all understand, because honesty to me means that if my son brings home a jersey from school, I send it back. But honesty to somebody else is, well, that family can afford to buy their kids another jersey. I don't know if I'm making any sense.
Yeah, I mean, Jeanette, I think it's true. It's strange. There's a rabbi working in Johannesburg who puts up statues of the word kind or kindness just randomly all over Johannesburg. I always find myself drawn to those things. I just think it's the most brilliant. I had to go and I found out about, we became friendly with him because I just thought it was the most random and fantastic thing. So if that's a random act, can you imagine if it was orchestrated and there was perhaps we need a culture of kindness. I mean, that's a really good idea, you know, awareness, education. What does it mean? Do we agree? Do we disagree? I think it's a very interesting thing. And so what's happening now, Jeanette, is while you're chatting in the chat, I see a small movement forming. Perhaps we can pull you into that. And there's an idea that we start a LinkedIn group, and perhaps we could focus on young people, Derek, to your point. You're agreeing. So and Denise already likes your idea. So let's have a look. Teachers here, we are talking about modeling ethics in our classrooms and spaces in our professional development. So there we go. You've got teachers in this conversation, and I'll tell you what I will do. I mean, I'll definitely, why don't we create something and then let's take it to both John and John and see what happens. Because it would be great for them to know that dialogue they had came to something. So I've put my email in the chat. I'm very happy to try and coordinate this. So, you know, I don't know. It may work, it may not. I hope it doesn't become one of those cool things where we're all, you know, spruced up on neuro drugs right now and all excited, and then it kind of ebbs away. Let's give it a go. But I see there's some teachers here, and I think there's some PhDs. We've got some really good firepower. Why don't we give it a go and see what happens? I'm very happy to make whatever resources I can through the school available. I don't know what we can dedicate to it, but I think this is fantastic. I'm personally happy to spend time on it. So that's a good idea. But do you see how if we engage with minds, and Jon Foster-Pedley has got a great piece of work on this about the ordinary human mind. And, you know, often education is seen as something which is looking for the elite, the best of. not good enough. The ordinary human mind is remarkable, and it's an incredible piece of hardware and software, and so that's all you need is an ordinary human mind, and then what you do with it can be incredible. So we have a bunch of ordinary minds here looking for something extraordinary to do. We could just do that. I see we've got some people from all over the world as well. Lorraine's in, that's great. Bronwyn's in. So there we go. Let's have a look. Okay, in the US, we've got a doctorate in organizational leadership and organizational development. Thank you, Denise. That's very good. It's very easy to recruit for this movement. Boy, we should do this once a week. We could solve many problems. Sarah's in. You see, Linda runs a school in Durban. Excellent. I'm in Durban right now, funny enough. I'm visiting my mum. So that's good. And Machine, maybe you could join us as the sort of minister of books. Your job could be to try and get more books in front of more young people and nudge their phones out the way. That's good. Zondre's in. Excellent. Hi, Zondre. I didn't know you were here. Fantastic. So excellent. We have 5 minutes left of this session because I'm very conscious about the reason I like to keep these things on time is I'm a big fan. Oh, wow. A military educator. Palesa. Wow. We didn't even speak about the army. I'm assuming that's army, but look, we'll take it, whatever it might be. You've got a lecture at WBS. Excellent. Rale Bochang is in. That's very good. Well, let's commit and let's see what happens. I was just talking about the 90 minutes. You can change things in a short space of time. You just have to commit and you have to focus. What we don't need is another 3-hour workshop on all the stakeholders, drawing up a project plan using some kind of amazing software with milestones. I'm a big fan of a simple idea, and then we take that idea and find a way to get it resourced so that we could just put it out there. And maybe what we aim for is, on your idea, Jeanette, perhaps we approach an outdoor company that's got, I know there are many billboards at the moment that are not being used. Perhaps there's some unused inventory, and I can look at that because I run the marketing department at the moment. So I could probably ask our suppliers about that. There are things we could probably do. I'm going to invite John and John as well into that group that we form. And what I invite you to do is find as many of the big players that we can, and let's bunch them together and see if they'll do something. And let's see. We've got Faith, we've got Masejo, we've got Shanita, we've got Vinesh, Alex, Wesley, Alison, yep, everyone is in. Okay, good. Christopher's in. Excellent. The other thing I wanted to mention, I noticed quite a bit of talk about, not quite a bit, but some talk about religion. I just wanted to quickly touch on that because I think it's really important. There's a lot of religious difference in the world. I'm not a religious person. I finally realized at the age of 48 that I'm an absurdist, and essentially what that means is that I'm completely hypnotized by how needy and self-important humans are and how completely silent and uncaring the universe is about our great drama. And what that gives me is a great sense of wonder and awe, because then the only thing that's more beautiful than profound meaning is with absolutely no meaning. I can watch miracles unfold every time I scuba dive, or every time I watch a kid having fun, or eat ice cream, or read a poem, or learn something, and I actually feel that kind of aha in my head. Or could possibly be for no reason at all. And what a beautiful reason to do that. I'm basically a sort of a half ape, half clown flying around a gas bomb that ultimately is doomed on a sort of a dying rock. And all of the things that I think are so hugely profound, I will have experienced regardless. I don't want to harm anyone. I don't really want to do anything like that. So that's amazing. I see Derek started screen sharing. Let's see, Derek, what have you got for us? I see a white screen. It might be my connection. Okay, we've got let's see, we've got Simon in, we've got Kikitsi's in, Soli's in, Kingsley's in. Very good. Please do take my email address. You'll have to all send me an email. I'll just have to collate those quickly. And what we might even do, if you're keen, why don't you just put your email address in the chat before we finish up? Let's do it like that. That might actually be a much better way to do this, because we'll have it all in one record. So do that, and then I'll try and create a list, and then I'll mail you all, and we'll go from there. And Lorraine, maybe we choose Ethical Revival. I quite like that. It's a good name for the project. Perhaps we can do something, So that's excellent. What I'll do is I'll leave this session open. So Cinco, if you could just keep the session open, let's get everyone's email address. And then, of course, I've got them all because you registered, but I don't want to contact anyone who doesn't want to, and that's also fine, by the way. Please understand that in the matrix that I, try to, divide the world into, the people who are very opinionated but don't have a lot of energy to add are also important to the mix. And one day I'll explain all of that, but it's not a judgment if you don't want to be involved. That's absolutely fine as well, only if you want to. So that's cool. I'll leave it open and see, but we are getting a lot of email addresses, which is brilliant. And then just as we round this off, I mean, I have an obligation to say that my school it does something called Henley Life, and that is basically to create opportunities like this, because we are under instructions from Jon to build the people who build the businesses that will build Africa, and I'm build the people vibes. That's my thing. So we are one of the few schools that has a head of social alliances in our team. And we try and find communities that have a shared idea or need, and then we try and do what we can to push that idea. And it's just the way we've been taught. And I'm quite a proud Henley student, because I was a really lousy high school student. I got a very, very small qualification in drama many years ago. One might call it a brochure, really, if you were honest. And that's all I had. But now I'm hoping to finish this master's and then do a doctorate because of Henley. So all I'm doing now is I'm plugging the school, because they helped me to set all of this up, and they brought Jon and Jon together. Thank you for your email addresses. This is brilliant. We're very excited. I just want to make sure, Cinco, if we could just save the chat, that would be amazing. We are 1 minute past now. I want to thank everybody so much for joining us. And I really want to encourage you, if we do another one of these, please join us. We've done one previous one on kindness with Faith Popcorn, who's become a friend. And I would love to invite you all to the next one. So keep an eye out for the Dean's Dialogues. This is the general format. So we'll have Jon talking to a guest that he's helped to choose and resonates with. And then from there, we will take the conversation and we won't make it the main focus. So I think Simon's mic was on. Never mind. We will find another guest in the very near future. We'll do the talk, and then we'll invite you again. So please do join us. Leave whenever you're ready. We're just going to wait. There's still some email addresses coming in. So I will take it that if your email's in the chat, that you are keen for us to try and do something. So we'll try and turn that into some kind of project. And thank you for joining me. It's very hard to find good conversation on a weeknight online, particularly, I suppose. So please do, join your partner, join your family, go back to what you were doing. I've got a little assignment to finish. So, but thank you so much for joining us. We really, really appreciate your time and energy. And I love that you all got so involved in the conversation. And if you didn't, perhaps next time. There's no pressure. We just love to get all of this kind of thinking down. And also, of course, all of you, even the people who RSVP'd who didn't make it tonight, will get the graphic representation of tonight's conversation. So I will now send this all off to Lita, and then she will transpose it into a really nice one-pager for us. It's going to be a busy one-pager, but when you look at it, you'll be triggered to remember the conversation. So it's kind of a trick we use that's really useful with recall. So and it'll develop your ideas. It's something you can look at and develop your own ideas and put them into whatever writing you're doing or whatever life, lessons you might want to impart, or how you lead or tell a leader. So yeah. So thank you so much. This has been a privilege, and we look forward until next time. So until then, thank you very much. And we'll just stay open to, it's a pleasure to all of you who had a good time. Thank you. And tweet about this if you like. You can talk about Dean's Dialogue, a hashtag if you like. You can also hashtag Henley Life. That's also fine. Let people know there's something better. Linda, I will get your email address. If I can make it to you, I'm going to be leaving shortly, in fact, tomorrow, but my mum needs me, so I'll be back next week. So let me stay in touch. I would love to come and conspire with you on how we can do some good things, and that'll be good. Pleasure, Tabang. Thank you, Primrose, Shanita, all of you. And Gabriel, thank you for your input. I didn't even mention your really good comment earlier on. That would be good. Linda, I will try and come and see you. That would be amazing. Nothing quite like a cup of something warm to sort of, socialize. So that's good. Thank you, Alex. That's amazing. Really, it's been an amazing turnout, actually, one of our bigger audiences for this. And I think as it grows, more people will come. Good night, Lorraine. Thank you. So please, just now that you've got my email address, if there are any other questions you'd like to ask about Henley, anyway, let me know, and let's see. So we'll get back to you. There's a lot to talk about, and we don't do it enough. And I've always believed this. If you can't find what you're looking for, make it happen. And we have the tools now. We had friends from the UK, from the USA, from all over the world joining us this evening. We're just connecting with you don't even have to be like-minded. Agreeing is not always a good thing. You can disagree, and that's amazing and awesome and safe and allowed and cool and all right. So let's see. I'm just checking to see that we've got all the email addresses. I think we might have. I see there's still about 60 people online. So I just want to make sure if anyone else hasn't sent your address, then let me know and just pop it in the chat. And I think we have enough people here, actually, for something very good. Let's have a look. Very good. Thank you, Lorraine. We appreciate it. Thank you, Shanita. We'll include you. Emeka, you're included now. Let's see. Emeka, we've got yours. Good night, Linda. I will speak to you on email. And let's see. I think I'm waiting until the last minute, so don't let it feel awkward. I'm just going to download the chat. That's my plan. I just want to make sure that we've got everybody that we need, because it's important that we do that. So I'm just going to check that I am still getting email addresses, which is fantastic. Thank you, Evelyn. Thanks, Wesley. And if there's anyone else who you think might like this, you can add their address as well. I mean, I don't volunteer someone if they're not keen, but let's see. Just gonna. I'm just going to keep an eye on just making some notes so we don't forget anything. Thank you, Emmanuel. Evelyn, thank you. Nompumelelo, glad you enjoyed it. Thank you for coming. Let's see if we have any more. Lyseche, thank you. Wow, if we get a high level of commitment here, we could do something really well. Thank you, Robert. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Great. So, Robert, if you want to give us your email address, I can include you. And also, of course, you are going to get the graphic anyway when it's ready. It won't take us too long. So that's good. We hope to do these at least once a month. It's just a case of lining up diaries and getting everybody involved. We try and do the next one as soon as we can. The other thing is to find great guests. I mean, there are many, but it's just, you really have to kind of curate this. What we didn't want to do was end up with like a thing which was sort of about the usual names. I think what you need are people who've genuinely contributed to what they talk about. And that's something, it came up quite a few times, action versus theory. You need a practitioner, preferably an academic who's a practitioner. That's the very best. Well, when I say the best, I mean it gives you a wider scope. You might find a great practitioner only who's really got lots to offer. That's also entirely possible. So let's see. Derek says we had a priest on as well. Fantastic, most welcome. I hope we need a priest in our. We should have a priest and a rabbi and an imam and an atheist and let's get everybody involved. I don't think we should limit ethics to anyone. So Derek, I don't know if you're the priest. If you are, then I would love to chat to you anyway. I've fantastic. My friend the rabbi is a wonderful guy to speak to. I haven't had a good long chat to a priest in a great deal of time. So that would be amazing. Thank you, Nompumelelo. So okay, Derek, we've got your email address. That's brilliant. Let's see. Good night, Rale Bohan. I can see we're kind of holding on. It's an interesting. It's interesting that we don't really want to leave a good. Want to see what happens next, which is quite interesting. But let's see. What I might do is great, Derek. Thank you. I might email you. If you are our priest, then we've got your email address. Welcome aboard. Fantastic. We're glad to have you. People often talk about diversity and then very easily slip into labeling people while they discuss diversity. It's just a very big flag. It's not a great way to kind of understand diversity. But anyway, we don't attack people who don't display an understanding of diversity. We try and teach them. That's the plan. Anyway, okay, so we have a really good number of email addresses. I'm going to ask for a last call because I don't want to keep people on. I'd like you to. You've given us your time, and let's appreciate that. So, Simko, I think now is a good time. Let's definitely. It's a pleasure, Simon. Thank you. Let's go ahead and download the chat and save that. And then we can get to our work of figuring this thing out. Might be messy, I don't know, but we'll give it a go. So let's see. Will the recording be shared? Emmanuel, what we generally do, so it's a little bit tricky because we have a lot of people taking part. Luckily, we didn't record anyone on video speaking. We recorded a couple of comments. So what I would just have to do to make sure that we ethically do this, because it would be ironic, right, if we did it unethically, is we just need to check that they're okay and that we use the recording. So if I can find that out, then I will put this on the website and I'll send a link out. And obviously we have your address. So what I might do is perhaps I'll make a note that we need to just update people when you receive the graphic of what was discussed. We could possibly tell you about how we might share that recording going forward. If we hit any roadblocks, then I'll obviously we won't share it, but the idea is to try and make these things, as useful as possible for as long as possible. So we can't get people into the learning environment. We like to show them what happens in the learning environment. It's very important. So that's good. All righty. I think we're good. I want to bid the final 27 people good night. And thank you so much again for your time. Simple, if you've got the conversation, which is our big thing, then I keep saying that and I could just save it, which is really a bit silly of me. I've saved it, so that's cool. So we have a backup. Thank you all so much. And the Bitter Enders, yeah, Alex, exactly. One of my favorite Afrikaans band, actually, Bitter Enders. Great, superb. I love them. Thank you. And we'll close it off now, but hopefully we'll be in touch soon. So thanks for your time and see you hopefully next time, or starting a movement for ethics. Thank you. Good night.